What's up, y'all? Hope you're ready for round two, because we got some really cool things to discuss. So, we left off with the last video having used just a tiny sliver of the Postman tests feature, and we used that so that we could leverage another advantage with Postman's collection variables, so that way we could have a little more seamless logging in. But today we're going to expand upon that just a little bit extra. So we're going to be able to write some tests just to validate our request bodies and our response bodies and make sure we're getting the right status code and that it's not taking too terribly long. So we're going to create those tests and we're going to utilize Postman's collection runner feature to be able to run a bunch of these at once, because I don't know about you guys, but if I had a pretty big API, which I know this project isn't, it'd be pretty miserable just trying to open up 50 tabs of everything in your collection and running every one of those requests manually. So the collection runner allows us to group our collection requests together and just run them synchronously. And we can choose which order we want, we can choose how many iterations we want the entire cycle to go through, but we'll take a peek at those features when we have the collection runner to look at. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop over to Postman. So I've got that blog demo that we were working on last week, and I have some blog routes that I need to define. So we left off with having oh, and I changed up these a little bit. I think that the root blogs does require authentication. I have a /previews, one that does not. So let me actually quickly add that in, because I now have 3 GET requests. So if you're not authenticated, which my token might still be good, I forgot what I set the expiration at, but we have the ability now to fetch all blogs even without a token. So we'll be able to test for this as well. And this one I need to make inherit auth from parent, so that way. Oh no, wait, never mind. I did say this was unauthenticated, but in the code I think I did change that up. No, I didn't. Okay, all eyes. Regardless, we will have to change this up because we need to use a variable as a placeholder for the ID. As we saw with my get all requests, I am utilizing UUIDs, so I can't just arbitrarily pick like 1 or 2 or 3, because UUIDs are 36-digit strings, and there's no way my goldfish brain is going to be able to remember a singular one of those. So we need a way to, parameterize those UUIDs into some kind of variable, and maybe we can use one of those variables in our URLs to do tests on, but I digress. So I need to go ahead and make a post request to create a blog, and these simply have just a rec body with a .content property. So now I'm not too big a fan of putting in the same garbage data over and over. I like to have some variety. So here I'm going to go back and utilize that Faker.js integration that we kind of hinted at last week. So they have a litany of random data fields that we can utilize throughout Postman. I'm going to use it specifically in the request body, but just like how we were using our collection variables, these are stored as global variables. It's available wherever you want them within Postman. And we're going to use that same syntax, the double curly brace, the mustache casing, if you will. And we need a $sign as the beginning marker of their variables. That's just how they designated all of their random variables. But here, I'm going to use random phrase, and maybe like a random business buzzword. Here we go, random BS adjective. So that's going to be like synergize or some other, you know, heavily mocked business term. And I need to also make this. Oh, whoops. Wait, did I have a post request already defined that I just completely overlooked? Yes. Yes, I did. Okay. So this one's pretty useless. But I guess I can maybe make this into a put request and say, hey, we will just use the data that I have defined here as the puts body. So and for my title for the put request, I'm putting in this little placeholder. So it reads off as, you know, put /API/blogs some ID. And I'm doing that, you know, for those very specific reasons. This is just the way I personally prefer to have my collections structured. But it just reads out pretty intuitively to me. Put API blogs ID. So I know it's a put request that I should be using to access a singular resource. Now, where is the ID? Well, I don't have one. So, I talked about how maybe we could save an ID because we are utilizing those UUIDs. And just like how with the login, we use the tests feature of the login post request to get stuff from the response body and set it to a collection variable. What if we did the same, but we did it for the ID of the item we just created? Let's go take a look at the response body of my post request and let's see what it returns. And it should do this. It should send a message saying blog was created successfully, and it should return the UUID. So let's go ahead and create a variable in my blog demo at the collection level. And I know we've got our token, which I named spaghetti, of course. If I change that to token, it won't be too much to update because yet again, I don't have to use this token variable in every request. I've set up this very convenient single source of truth. So if I name this variable token, well, all I have to do is change it to token here, where I use it. And additionally, I have to change my login request to look for that. So just trying to get to a cleaner variable habit because that was an artifact of last week's. So I'm going to create a variable here called new blog ID. And we'll leave it at that. So I'm going to leave it empty for now. And what I will do is I will come to the post request. And we do see here that in the response body, we have this .id property, whose value is a string of the UUID for the blog that was just created. So, oh geez. I'll go ahead and destructure it out of the response body, which we have access to via the Postman's .response object. So Postman pm.response.json to go ahead and parse that data. It's a synchronous method, so we don't have to create an async function. And I can take this ID now, and we'll do some validation for it, just checking to see if it exists. If ID, we'll call postman.collection variables. That's going to give us the scope of all of the variables available in this blog demo. And it's a set, so we have to use the set syntax here. And we will set the new blog ID variable to the value of the ID we just created. So, new blog ID, Let me copy paste that just to make sure I don't typo anything. Cool. All right. Well, this is going to let me create a blog. And lo and behold, here we have that variable. Now, how can we leverage that to our advantage? Well, guess what? I can come here for my GET request for a specific blog, because right now I don't have any blogs that I'm, getting. I don't have a specific blog, rather. Now I do. I have the blog that I just created. What about if I wanted to edit a blog? Well, guess what? We can use that ID in the URL as well. And I hope you can kind of see where this is maybe cascading towards. I can create a blog and then get it and then update it and then eventually delete it. And that means that I only really messed around with the item I just created. All of the remainder of my data stays intact if you wanted to do such a feature. But we could have the collection runner, when we get to that window, run all of those processes in that specific order, which works out just absolutely beautifully. So let me go ahead and update our blog. Oh no, I think I just was thinking like a goldfish, I suppose, and I typed in um, a bad response message. But this is the update. So if we run this again, it's still utilizing that same blog ID. I should not have deleted it. And it's currently used the 1080p HDD circuit. Then you can transmit the auxiliary monitor. So it's that tech jargon. But now it's going to be tech jargon plus some business buzzwords. So tech jargon, and then we get frictionless real time. So they're the business buzzwords. Here's the tech jargon, and we do see that it did update successfully. So finally, now we can just duplicate this. And for something like a GET request for a specific item, the delete request, I mean, this follows coding conventions as well. Your code's going to be remarkably similar between the two, but for the requests, pretty much the same thing. This one does require authentication. I don't allow people to just anonymously delete stuff on this blog. So I'm going to rename it to not copy, but instead just delete. So delete API/blog/ID. I really should name these a little better, like auth and no auth, just for consistency's sake. And I did not mean to duplicate that, but rather rename it. So a little bit of consistency goes a long way with just making projects easier to organize. And this is not a Postman specific thing, just my general coding tip in general. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong with your code, as long as it's consistent. If you're consistently wrong, well, it's easier to update and change. So that's just my little take. And actually, yeah, we are utilizing, I do require authentication on this request, so I do need to change this to auth. And yet again, this is just changing the titles. It's not affecting the requests in the slightest. Okay. And now I can delete that specific blog. Now, I did... this goes a little against the concept of idempotence. Idempotent operations are a way of just saying one input should always produce the same output for RESTful APIs. So if you delete a resource, people have different arguments whether or not you should return just a 200 every time, or maybe a 204, or a 202 to say like the deletion's on queued but you haven't done anything yet, or even a 404. I'm breaking idempotence here and using the 404, which is usually like the least suggested community one, but I do want to show that, I actually have deleted this. So what I do currently just for this specific test is after I have deleted an item, if I'm unable to delete that item again, if my database says nothing was deleted, then I will assume that we should 404 it. And so here I can confirm that, well, that blog is officially gone if I get a 404 here, which is cool. So just wanted to show that, yes, this variable is actually running through. And so yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at utilizing those variables together. Let's go ahead and write some tests too pretty quickly. I'm just going to use some of the snippets because it's a pretty small data set. I don't really have a whole lot to validate. For here, status code 200, that's what I should be expecting. And I don't really have any variables to set for, a get all blogs kind of request. So there's not really anything I want to check for. If I were looking for just a small response, I probably would do some response body checks. But however, we're just going to be getting back an array of blogs. So there's not really a whole lot for me to validate here. I might use the response time here and just make sure that, we get a response in under 200 milliseconds. But that's pretty much it. So I'll copy paste some of these into tests for other ones, just to ensure that I'm getting the data back that I want. And I mean, the blog's previews page is going to be the exact same data, just with the content truncated. So, I mean, yeah, it's going to have the exact same tests. The new blog, or the specific blog, we can validate stuff like the request body, or the response body rather, because it's going to be one singular item coming back. I don't have anything here. So yet again, going with the idempotence, some say that maybe you should 404, some say that maybe you should 200 or 204, and I think more people tend to say keeping it 200 is the most kind of idempotent and most expected operation. So I know that I did set that up for the delete request just to kind of exemplify the feature, to show that yes, the blog ID that we were utilizing has actually successfully deleted things. I'll go ahead and test for that here though. So we'll test for 200 status code. We'll also validate that it took less than 200 milliseconds. You can write your own test too, like you don't have to be bound by some like strings as long as you're using their validation library. So I can say that response content property is longer than 5 characters. We'll go with that. Just making sure I don't have any short blogs, I suppose. So what I will do is postman.expect. Let's see, I also need to grab the response body, or at least a property out of it. So I will have that .content property. So I'll extract the content property from the object, which we can extract via postman.response.json. So this parses that for us. And I'll use the postman.expect. I'll pass in content as my value, and it's not the content per se that I want to evaluate, it's its length. So we can use postman.expect. It's a function that you can pass a value in. Then you can use many of its chained operations to see what really you want to validate for. So I'll expect the content length to be greater than, and we're going to say 5 characters, just some kind of arbitrary constraint here, just throwing that out to you guys so you can see a little more of what's possible. So you can validate, property by property. You can validate multiple things in this function and just check to see if all of them are, exactly what you're looking for. And let's see, tests. I'll do that here too, making sure I have a 200. If I try to run this right now, we're actually going to have a failing test. And so if I look at my test tab, which I didn't save, we'll have that be a failing code now, because it's saying, hey, you tried to assert that I was going to have a 200, but we got a 404. So there's that. And our post request. I do want to create an assertion here, just checking to see that I got an ID back. So similar, following, what we had previously. I'm going to have the 200 status code check, or I guess 201 really, because this is a post request. I do want to make sure that I am, creating some data here. Then I am validating for the time. Finally, I do want to validate that I did get an ID back. An ID was returned. So I'll use the postman.expect, and I don't have to, do any destructuring of stuff, or I don't have to extract information from the response body because, well, I already did that here kind of at the top level scope. So I've got ID available here for me. So I can check to see to have length, I guess. Or maybe length of. Well, I'll do that. So we pass in this string, and we are asserting that it's a 36 character. Cool. So we'll do that, just making sure we get a UUID back. And then the put request, let's see. What does that return? Just the message? Okay. All right, so just throwing out some tests just so we can get a quick kind of overview of how everything looks in the pane. And, we can even leverage the features that I utilized here in the blogs routes for the login. If I take my registration route, what if I register a brand new user at the start of my requests? And I take that new user's credentials and I save that new user's credentials to a variable. And then I use those variable credentials to log in. Because right now I've got like Hunter2 and then this Faker.js data for a random email placed here manually. So we can also simulate a brand new user account being created and logging in, and we will have all of our requests run as that user, which is really crazy. We can keep on extending upon this so much more, but let me go ahead and add a quick author request. All right. So we need our email account, which for user registration here, I think I only require email and password. I don't even have the, I don't have like a name property or anything. I keep it pretty simple with this. So it's basically like the precursor to a login because it's just persisting that user's information in the database, albeit with, a hashed and salted password, but we'll go ahead and save that email here as random email. Cool. see. I don't know if they had like a fake hash or something, but they say they have a random like 15-digit thing. So I just wanted to go for like slight realism. But now, thus far, we've been taking data from the response body, but Postman does still have full access to the request body. So we can actually take that information and shove it into collection variables as well. So let's go back to my collection here. I'm going to set up a new user email and a new user password variable. Boop, boop, copy that. And then in our test panel, because, conveniently, we can't, this is a JSON body. Like, I can't have code executing in here. This is a very specific, strict standard. I can't arbitrarily write JavaScript here. But the test panel is just kind of a little sandbox almost of code that we can have execute after a response is returned. And it still will have scope of the request body. So I can say, if I could type curly braces today, that'd be great. We'll extract the information not from the response body, but from the request. Let's see, I think that's the call, but we'll figure out real quick if I break things. So within my request body, it is email. That doesn't look right. Let's see, .to.json. Okay. I think the body is kind of useless there. I think I just need to do request.to.json. It's kind of weird how they don't have like the same consistent API call for that, but I think that's right. I can, hey, we do have this interactive console here, which I usually keep kind of collapsed. It's just going to log out like every request, but I could also just log out. And you might notice that I just logged this out as an object, and it's because I'm weird and I like logging stuff out as objects instead of just random arbitrary variables. So that way I don't have magic values showing up in my console logs. I instead will have I'm taking advantage of the ES6 object shortcut. So it's going to evaluate as an object with an email property whose value is that, and a password property whose value is that variable. So that means, if I want to log out multiple values or even one by itself, I'll just enclose it in curly braces. It makes for way nicer logs. Undefined, undefined. So I'm not hitting that up the right way. Let's see. Maybe just request body as a flat property. I suppose I could also read the docs, but we're developers, we're stubborn, we're not going to read any documentation. Why can't I remember? Let's see. Is it Postman request? No, because that's going to be all the meta information. Let's log out the entire request.body property and see what that returns. Okay, sorry. It's got a .raw feature. I'm thinking way too much of a... Okay, it's got that .raw property that I have to parse. Okay. I always forget it's got a weird structure. So, let's see. And do this. I don't think they have a JSON method. I think I have to manually parse that. Let's see, though. Yet again, we'll just go ahead and log that out real quick. Okay, so yeah, I do have to parse that manually. Goodness. All right, now I should have the variables that I need. Yet again, I can just console log these real quick. Sweet, there we go, y'all. Okay, if I run this again, another random email, another random password. Do I care about those values? Not particularly, because I'm going to shove these in some variables, and we'll go ahead and set them to some collection variables. So postman.collectionVariables.set. I have the key copied. No, I don't. I believe it is just new underscore user underscore email in all caps. Let me zoom out a little bit so everything flows a little more nicely. All right. So now when I create a new user, when that user registers, let's go take a peek at, let me discard those changes. I accidentally had that tab open. So it was like, hey, I'm holding on to these empty fields, but we had some data written in the background. And I'm like, no, discard your unwritten changes. Let the background data persist. So we have, our user and our password here. It was like unique61@hotmail.com. If I come back and look at it, no, we've got haskellduran13@gmail.com. So it's obviously, creating these new user accounts. Well, now, finally, with that new user account we just created, we can come here and say like, nah, instead of using this hard-coded value, we can just say new user email as my variable. And new user password. And just like that, we have an automated process. Brand new user, don't care about their credentials because they get shoved in a variable and reutilized here. We get a token as that new user, which gets saved to a variable, and then all of my requests here get utilized. So all of this is being done as setup, so we can now finally go utilize that collection runner. So you'll find that here in your file menu. If you drop it down and look at new runner tab, you'll have a keyboard shortcut. Depending on your OS, it might just be Control-Shift-R or Command-Shift-R. But it opens up just completely, not caring about what context. You have to tell it which collection you've got, because yet again, you could be like me with dozens and dozens of different projects with collections associated with them. So you have to say which ones you want. And I mean, you can run multiple ones. But you drag it there. It's going to take all of your requests and lump them in. And you can selectively say like, oh, well, the API hello, maybe I don't want to run that, but I want to run everything else. You can also take this little slider here and adjust which ones you want to utilize. Now for me, I obviously want my register to go before my login, so I will do that. So I register, creates a new random user, logs in as that user, and then it goes through this whole litany of all of these items. So what I will do first is run this post request, which, if you remember, creates a new blog and saves this ID to a variable. Then I get that ID. Then I update that ID. Then I delete that ID. So this step of 4 requests here all of this is going to leave my data completely intact, at least in my blogs. I do have my like user creation here, and I don't have like a delete users route, so I really should implement something like that. But for demo's sake, this leaves my blogs completely pristine from a state. We also see this iterations tab over here. Well, if I wanted to generate a bunch of data, let's ignore the tests first and foremost. What if I just wanted to generate a bunch of data? Because, you know, my post request will create a brand new blog. Well, I can come over to here, and you can have all of your post requests that create data selected here. And you can say, okay, run those, 50 times. And it's going to run everything that you've got selected in 50 separate iterations. So this is going to run 50 updates. And we see some intermittent failing tests here. Those tests are just letting me know, for my insert, I'm making sure I've got a UUID returned. I have a good status code. It's failing some of the insertions to the database. Some of them have taken more than 200 milliseconds. This is hitting up a remote database, not a local one, so that's kind of to be expected. Some of these, oh dang, yeah, 1 second. That was a slow network connection. But for everything else, we see that, okay, well, great. Like I'm very happy with these results. It took me just a few seconds, and now I have 50 brand new blogs in my database. Now, granted, you're going to be limited a pretty decent amount to, whatever data they have in their Faker.js integration. Or if you wanted to, you could import some kind of Faker library yourself. And within the context of your, your own post request, server side, you could have fake data generation there. So that way you have more like meaningful, less nonsensical data that follows with your structure a little better. But let's go back to the runner tab and just see everything again. So I'll put everything in the order I want. So register, login, get, post, get, put, delete. And we can leave API hello in there too. I mean, I don't have any tests. It doesn't really hurt or help anything, but it'll let me go ahead and run through the full slew of everything. And we see this nice little, if we have the summary pane, we see the nice overview left and right column of past tests and failed tests. And everything past here, I'm not like hemorrhaging my database's performance by like submitting a bunch of post requests all at once. So it's able to keep up pretty all right. But yeah, so that is just kind of a brief nutshell of defining Postman tests and how we can use those variables to help kind of automate stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed this second part of the video. And if you want to see more really cool videos from Covalence, go ahead and like and subscribe, and we'll have more videos for you. So see y'all around.